I'm joined by my good friend Jonathan Neville, who was a well-known author, writer, historian, and an individual who's um, making some waves, shall we say, in the best possible way. And he's written a variety of books. I've been fortunate to be his publisher for the last 10 years, eight or 10 years, how long it's been.
Yeah.
We're looking here at this array of his titles that we've done so far. And today we want to focus in on one of the books in particular, the one here called Whatever Happened to the Golden Plates. And I just want to first start off, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us today. And can you tell us a little bit of background on this? What prompted you to write this book in the first place?
Okay. Yeah, it's good to be with you here. Years ago, when I was in seminary, we had an account in one of our books, the lesson books that we had, and it talked about when David Whitmer went to Harmony to pick up Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, and along the way to Fayette, on the road to Fayette, they met this guy on the side of the road, and David Whitmer offered him a ride, and the guy declined, and he said he was going to Cumorah. And David Whitmer said, well, he'd never heard of Cumorah before. He didn't know what it meant. But he asked Joseph Smith, the guy kind of vanished or wandered off. And he asked Joseph Smith who the guy was. And he says, well, he was a messenger who had the plates. And he was one of the three Nephites. And so that story always was in the back of my mind. I thought it was kind of a cool story. You know, they meet this divine messenger of some sort. And I'd kind of forgotten about it over the years because you don't hear about it much anymore in church publications. But then, I don't know, whenever 5 or 6 years ago, I was rereading those accounts and I came across that again. And I had the question, why would the messenger who had the plates be going to Cumorah before he went to Fayette? You'd think that he would be happy to just accept a ride to Fayette, right?
Yeah.
Instead of walking. And David Whitmer described him as an older guy with a long beard and wearing a wool suit. And he said that he had a knapsack and it looked like he had the plates in it or a book. So he in retrospect, he realized the guy had the plates. So I wondered a couple of things. I wondered, well, why did this guy have the plates? How did he get them? And why wasn't he going to Fayette? And so when I researched a little more, I found that Lucy Mack Smith had said that before Joseph, when he was translating the Book of Mormon, one day as he applied the Urim and Thummim to his eyes to look on the plates, instead of having the translation, he got a commandment to write to David Whitmer and ask him to come pick him up. But he had never met David Whitmer. And so Oliver Cowdery said, well, I know David, so I'll write him a letter. So Oliver wrote the letter. And this was all, that part of it was in Lucy Mack Smith's account. And she said that Joseph was concerned about what to do with the plates, and he prayed, and the Lord told him to give them to this messenger. And it's interesting because in Joseph Smith's history, which is in the Pearl of Great Price, I think it's verse 46, I'm not positive, but he says, by prior arrangement, I met with the messenger and gave him the plates. So that kind of fit that part of it. But this was in harmony, see?
That was
So
in harmony. So what you're trying to answer in this book is whatever happened to the gold plates. And so
yeah,
your first out the gate is, well, they ended up in a knapsack on their way to Cumorah.
right. Yeah, that was the first example that we had. But back then, I assumed there was only one set of plates, that all the plates that Joseph Smith translated, he got out of the stone box and took them to Harmony. But then when this story kind of nagged at me, is like, I was trying to figure out why would this guy be taking one of the three Nephites, why would he be taking the plates from Harmony to Cumorah before he went to Fayette? Didn't make any sense.
Why didn't Joseph Smith just take him in the wagon and just take him to Fayette with him?
Well, the short answer is because the Lord told him to give him to this messenger. He had translated the entire set of plates up through the title page, which was the last leaf of the plates.
Mhm.
And if you remember the story, he and Oliver got to the end and they considered going back and retranslating from the beginning because that was where the 116 pages were from the book of Lehi. And instead, the Lord told them, no, don't retranslate all that. Instead, you have to translate the engravings on the plates of Nephi.
So we've always assumed in church history that those plates, the small plates of Nephi, were somehow included in those
Right.
three bound rings of original plates. But it's kind of like, well, then why did he give those back? And did he get those
Yeah.
back again later? I mean, what then transpired? I guess that's the next part of the question.
Yeah. Well, that was a question I had because it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so why would this guy be taking the plates to Cumorah? Well, that's when it dawned on me that what he was taking to Cumorah were the abridged plates, not the plates of Nephi. When and we can pull up the scriptures and look at this in a minute, but when the Lord told Joseph Smith, you have to translate the engravings that are on the plates of Nephi, Joseph didn't have the plates of Nephi at that point. That was kind of the epiphany that I had. I said, wait a minute, then everything made sense because this messenger took the abridged plates from Joseph in Harmony. He took them to Cumorah, where the repository of all the plates were. And there he picked up the plates of Nephi and took those to Fayette. That's why Joseph translated the plates of Nephi and Fayette. Now,
Okay.
I should say this brings up another point that some people don't realize. So the Book of Mormon that we have today is not it's in chronological order, but it's not in the order that Joseph translated it. Because,
Okay.
First Nephi through Words of Mormon was the last thing that Joseph translated. He translated that in Fayette. And we can tell that because it has a signature or the handwriting of the Whitmer brothers, who were some of the scribes.
Hmm.
And they never went to Harmony, so they had to be the scribes in Fayette. So when it starts with First Nephi 1, that was a translation that Joseph did in Fayette, not in Harmony. When we get to Mosiah, from Mosiah through the end of the Book of Mormon and the title page, that's what Joseph translated in Harmony.
Hmm.
And so once you go ahead, you have a question about
No, I
that?
was just going to say, because when I read the Saints book, all the way through that first volume, it never ever mentioned that episode with David Whitmer and the man on the
Right.
side of the road. Why?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Why do they omit?
Why
Who
did
knows
that?
why?
Isn't
But
that kind of important?
I still have my old seminary manual that has it in there, and it's interesting because it was Orson Pratt and Joseph F. Smith when they were apostles. They went out to interview David Whitmer, and he related this story to him.
Hmm. So it is
But
it's in the Joseph Smith papers. It's a bona fide testimony.
oh yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's in the Joseph Smith papers, but it's in the official church history because these two apostles wrote a formal report to John Taylor, who was president of the Quorum of the 12 at the time, relating this entire account. And then there was another guy named Edward Stevenson, who he used to go back east and interview people. He wanted to know more about church history. And he related this. He also interviewed David Whitmer and heard the same thing. In fact, it was Zina Young, who was one of Brigham Young's wives, but she had she in one of her accounts, she said that she had been baptized as a young girl by David Whitmer and Hiram Smith were missionary companions in Ohio. And this was in 1832, as I recall. And she even mentioned that the girls all wanted to be baptized by Hiram because he was more handsome. And so she remembered from all the way back then, and
Hmm.
she hadn't seen David Whitmer since, of course. So this was in the 1870s in Utah. So she knew Edward Stevenson was going to go interview David Whitmer, and she said, "Be sure to ask him about the messenger on the side of the road." So she remembered that story all the way back from when these guys were missionaries.
Interesting. So,
Yeah.
what's the traditional narrative that I mean, I kind of know what is the traditional
Mhm.
narrative, and then how does yours depart from the traditional narrative, or how does it
Okay.
fit into that whole
Yeah.
discussion?
Well, the traditional narrative is that Moroni put the plates in the stone box on the hill Cumorah. And Joseph Smith got those in 1827, right? He took them down to Harmony, and then he translated the first part of it, which was he later said was the Book of Lehi. He translated with Martin Harris as the scribe, and then Martin Harris lost those 116 pages. And so then Joseph had to forfeit the plates and the Urim and Thummim for a while. He got them back in September of 1828, took him back down to Harmony, And starting around November, he started translating again, but he didn't get very far because Emma was busy and his brother apparently was a scribe for part of it. But it wasn't until Oliver Cowdery arrived in April that they really started translating full time.
Mm.
But they started with the abridged plates. We know that it was the abridged plates because the title page explains what was in the set of plates. It was an abridgment of the plates of Nephi, abridgment of the plates of the Jaredites, and then Moroni sealed it. And that explains the entire Book of Mormon we have today, except for the plates of Nephi.
But don't traditionally there's an assumption that, well, the plates of Nephi were just in there.
Yeah, yeah, there is.
Well,
I
because
always
we
thought
do
that
have the
too.
plates of Nephi, right? They are part of the plates
Yeah,
of Nephi, but then what are these small plates and how did they fit in?
yeah. Well, so what was in what I assumed was that, like you said, that the plates of Nephi that Joseph translated as in Fayette were somewhere in the set of plates. But there's always been a debate about how that's even possible. Partly because when they reached the end of the plates, Joseph and Oliver wanted to go back and retranslate the first part, and the Lord said, "No, don't translate that. You have to translate the plates of Nephi." But if the plates of Nephi were in that set of plates, the Lord wouldn't have had to tell them that. They would have just continued translating. The other
And
thing is, as I mentioned, the title page doesn't say anything about any original plates in that set of plates. So when I got this idea that there were two different sets of plates, and I started looking for evidence of that, it's real obvious in the scriptures and what Brigham Young said and what all these church history sites are. We don't have time to go through all those. They're all in the book.
yeah,
But I since it's Come Follow Me this year, we're talking about the Doctrine and Covenants. So it turns out, I don't know when this will be posted, but this week we're studying D&C sections 6 through 9. And one of the clues is in section 9.
okay.
So if you want,
All right.
should I share my screen and pull it up so people can see
Yeah,
it?
yeah, put it on the screen.
Okay. Okay. I'll share the screen here. First off, so this is the lesson for February 3rd through 9th,
Mhm.
where we talk about the D&C 6 through 9. And here's section 9. If at the very beginning, I underlined the critical parts of it because it says, I'm not going to read the whole verse 1, but it says, the Lord says, I would that ye should continue until you have finished this record, which I have entrusted unto him, unto Joseph Smith. And then behold, other records have I that I will give unto you power that you may assist to translate. So right there in section 9, we're talking about two different sets of records.
Okay, now what verse is this?
This is verse
Which verse?
1
Oh,
and
the very
2
beginning. Okay, got
in
it.
section 9.
Yep.
So right here, once I had this idea that there were two different sets of plates and I read this, and it all made sense.
Hmm.
Because this record was the plates that Joseph got from the stone box, right, from on the hill Cumorah. And that's the one that what I call the abridged plates, because that's what the title page says they were, abridged plates. So the Lord told Oliver, continue until you finish this record, till you finish all the abridged plates, and then I have other records that I'll give you power to translate.
It's pretty clear when he says other records.
I know it's real obvious.
I mean,
So,
why do we never see this? What,
well, yeah, that's the question. And I think for a long time people thought it was referring to like maybe the book of Abraham or the book of Moses or something like this. But those were records that that Oliver Cowdery helped him assist to translate the same way as he did the Book of Mormon.
right, right.
So the interesting thing is here, the very next section answered the question. Here's section 10. This is the introduction to it. And then verse 41 is the answer to what those other records are. It says, therefore, you shall translate the engravings which are on the plates of Nephi. And then in verse 42, it says, you shall publish it as the record of Nephi, which is what we have in the Book of Mormon today in First Nephi. And then in verse 44, it says, behold, they, the ones who stole 116 pages, they have only got a part or an abridgment of the account of Nephi. And we know that they had the abridgment of the account of Nephi because that's what the title page said about the abridged plates.
Right.
So the key here is the Lord is making a distinction between the original plates of Nephi and the abridgment of the account of Nephi. And the all you have to realize is that when Joseph received this revelation, section 10, he didn't have the plates of Nephi yet. And once you realize that, then all this fits and makes perfect sense.
The plates of Nephi, meaning the small plates of Nephi. The
That's what
first,
we call the small plates.
yeah,
Yeah,
what we call, first Nephi through Words of Mormon,
right.
right?
Exactly.
And
So oh, go ahead. What?
no, I was just saying that that's a game changer. Are there other indications that we have besides the, statements in the Doctrine and Covenants, the
Yeah,
revelations of
well, those
Are there other
section 9 and 10 make it pretty clear, but there's lots of other indications. And like again, we don't have time to go through all of them because they're in the book. But one of the first ones was, why was this messenger taking the plates, the abridged plates, to Cumorah? It didn't make any sense for him to go to the repository in Cumorah unless he was going to pick up the plates of Nephi there to take to Fayette for Joseph to translate.
So what you're
But
saying is that there's another vault of records at Cumorah that
right,
housed these other sets of plates. And we do know from testimony of Joseph and Oliver that they did go to the Hill Cumorah and actually enter a room that was filled with
right.
plates. So there's supporting evidence for that argument.
Yeah, that's right. And plus, I mentioned what Joseph said in Joseph Smith history, that he gave the plates to the messenger. But Brigham Young said that Joseph Smith returned the plates to the repository. And he also said that he took the Urim and Thummim when he returned the plates. So there was always this discrepancy in church history about whatever happened to the golden plates. That's why the title of the book is that.
Yeah.
Because Joseph Smith said he gave them to the messenger, Brigham Young said he took them back to the repository. So
Ah,
that's an inconsistency
and
that's
now if we
resolved
have
when you
two
know there's two
sets,
plates.
there's two
Yeah,
places they could go.
that's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then there's lots of other discrepancies. Joseph's father said he weighed the plates and they weighed 30 pounds. Other people said they weighed 60 pounds.
Now I'm just
And
thinking about Joseph's father, right? He was a barrel maker, right? What do they call that? And he, these are men that work with their hands a lot. They're lifting bales of hay, they're lifting,
right.
everything. They know the difference between a 60-pound thing and a 30-pound
Sure.
thing, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's not like you would just, oops, I'm off by half. That
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
I'm no expert this way, but I can pick up my wife's suitcase and tell her how close she is to 50 pounds, because I've done
Right.
it so
Yeah,
many
exactly.
times. And so it's not, that's a huge discrepancy,
Yeah.
that kind of weight difference.
So that's just one example of the problems. So on this slide, let me just show you, explain these two different narratives real quickly. The old narrative is that there was one set of ancient golden plates that Joseph translated, and Joseph got them from Moroni's stone box in the Hill Cumorah. That's what we've all thought all along, right?
Yeah.
And this is a typical example of that. Hopefully you can see that. But the source plates were the small plates, the large plates, and the plates of ether. And this diagram shows that the large plates and the plates of ether were abridged, and the small plates were inserted into the gold plates that Joseph got from the Hill Cumorah. And
Right.
then that was translated into the Book of Mormon. So the new narrative, reframed narrative, is that there were two sets of plates, the abridged plates in Moroni's stone box that Joseph translated in Harmony, and the original plates of Nephi from the repository in the Hill Cumorah that Joseph translated in Fayette. So you just have to realize there's two completely different sets of plates. So I adapted that graphic to show that the small plates were in the depository in the Hill Cumorah, and Joseph translated those in Fayette. But the large plates and the plates of ether that Mormon abridged were in the stone box. And that's where Joseph translated in Harmony.
Okay, now
So,
that makes sense to me, and it seems to be fairly well supported.
mhm,
We have other examples, I think, with people that saw the plates. Um,
mhm.
that do the two groups of witnesses describe the plates differently in any way?
Well, that's a good point because there's neither one of them described them in a lot of detail. Because if you read the testimony of the three witnesses, they just saw the angel showed them the plates. But then they made other additional statements down the road. And the eight witnesses, again, their testimony is fairly brief, but they said they handled the plates.
Hmm.
And very few, I know Joseph's father said he weighed the plates, and I think maybe Hiram Page made some, extracurricular comments about it, but they never talked about it in much detail. But they did not say, none of them said there was any sealed portion among the eight witnesses. The three witnesses, David Whitmer made a comment that some part of it looks sealed. And they said that Moroni turned the pages and declared that it was an authentic translation. But they didn't really, neither group really described them in a lot of detail, like the thickness or how large they were. The eight witnesses described the engravings as being very fine and curious and so on. But from what we know about it, it appears that Joseph had showed the three witnesses. Well, Joseph didn't show him. It was the angel Moroni that showed it. And that was in fulfillment of the prophecies in the Book of Mormon, that there would be three witnesses, as well as in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 17. The eight witnesses, that was never part of the scriptural prophecy, that there would be eight witnesses. Now, in First Nephi, I think, or Second Nephi, I think it says that there would be three witnesses and maybe other people could see them, but it doesn't specify the number. And we know that other people saw the plates. Josiah Stoll saw them. Mary Whitmer saw them. Now, we're not sure whether she saw the plates of Nephi or the abridged plates. That's a little uncertain, but most likely it was the plates of Nephi. But it appears that Joseph Smith just kind of decided, I'm sure with the Lord's approval, that he wanted someone to see the plates of Nephi as well, and he had them. There's no angel required to show them to anybody.
Right.
He just went and showed them to these people. In fact, his mother said that the plates that he showed to the eight witnesses he got from an ancient Nephite, which is not an angel, right? She always talked about an angel as opposed to an ancient Nephite, which fits the description.
Now that seems to be a departure as well, because we're talking about Moroni, who obviously, introduced Joseph Smith to the whole Book of Mormon narrative and the plates in the hill and all that. But it
Right.
seems like the portly gentleman with the beard, who I think he referred to himself as Nephi. He's like
Well,
he's a different player, and we don't
yeah,
get that distinction in our history clearly.
a little bit, because Mary Whitmer, the one, David's mother, who said that the messenger showed her the plates, the old man showed her the plates. She said that he had introduced himself as Brother Nephi. And when David Whitmer asked Joseph who it was, Joseph told him it was one of the three Nephites who were promised that they would not die, And so when Lucy Mack Smith said that the plates he showed to the eight witnesses he got from an ancient Nephite, well, that fits that description. Everything else, whenever she talked about the visit of Moroni, it was an angel who came. And so let me bring up this, we might be digressing too much, but this is interesting because in Joseph Smith's history, that's in the Pearl of Great Price, it says it was Moroni who came and visited him that night. When it was originally published, it said it was Nephi. So this has always been an issue in church history, because critics say, well, Joseph didn't get his story right, etc. And so later on in the 1850s, I think it was, church historians changed that narrative to be Moroni, because Albert Cowdery had said it was Moroni.
Mm.
Well, it's easy his history that was published in the Times and Seasons, that's now in the Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith didn't write that. His scribes wrote it and kind of submitted it to him for his review. But it's easy to understand why they would be confused, because both Moroni and Nephi interacted with Joseph Smith on multiple occasions. And Brigham Young actually wrote a letter to his son explaining all this, and which I included in the book, so people can see why these things can be confused. But it's very obvious that Nephi was one of the three Nephites, as Joseph Smith explained. And we know from the Book of Mormon that there were 12 disciples. One of them was named Nephi. And then there were three that were promised that they would not suffer death, right?
Yeah.
They weren't named.
Right.
So, but the chance of one of them being Nephi is, 1 out of 4. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Pretty high. That opens up a whole new kind of
Hmm.
venue of discussion and a kind of a theory I have that, the plates, the gold plates, my own theory, are a thing of this earth. They are physical. They're made of gold or, metals. And so it it seems to make sense in some cosmic way that while these three Nephites who are resurrected beings, they're not glorified.
Well, they're
I mean, excuse me, they're
translated.
not
Yeah.
resurrected. They're
Yeah.
translated beings. They're not
Yeah.
resurrected and glorified. So that makes them, I guess you would say, tangibly different than, say, a Moroni, who we know was a resurrected
Right.
individual, an angel, right? And there may be, that they are in a better place to be able to handle things of the earth, like gold plates, and carry them
Yeah.
about.
Good
Because I don't
point.
think people are snapping their fingers and angels making plates move around, right?
Right.
There's some
Good
physical,
point. Hmm.
earthly activity going on here that takes an earthly being that can be highly trusted, right? So
Yeah.
your three Nephites are classic for that, to carry these things about.
Hmm. Yeah. Excellent point. Sure.
So anyway, that's just it makes sense in that point of view that you'd have
Well,
those.
there's another aspect of this. People say, well, what does it make if there are one or two sets of plates? One of the significant things is it resolves these issues in church history that have been kind of murky and problematic. But another is it points out that Joseph Smith really was translating the plates. He wasn't just reading words off a stone and a hat. And that's because if he wasn't really like the earliest anti-Mormon book was called Mormonism Unveiled. And it said, well, Joseph didn't really even need the plates because he was just reading off this peep stone that he put in a hat.
Hmm.
And if that was the case, it wouldn't matter if there were one or two sets of plates because he wasn't using them anyway.
Right, right.
But
So
as we saw right in D&C 10, the Lord told him to translate the engravings on the plates of Nephi. That was pretty specific. He
yeah.
didn't say just read the words that appear on this stone in the hat. And
And
so,
when it came time to do another part, he said, I have other plates, right? It's not
yeah,
like the one plate contains all the
yeah,
intelligence. Yeah.
yeah, there'd be no reason to have another record if
Yeah.
he wasn't actually translating the record.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's why it's significant also. In fact, that's why I'm wearing my Urim and Thummim hat here.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Which is another conversation that we'll have in another interview
Yeah,
when we talk
sure.
about your, by means of the Urim and Thummim. Now, I'm going
Hmm.
to end with one more question, and that is, um, after you show that diagram that we saw, where you show the sources of the Book of Mormon and so forth, and the logic behind it, I don't see any controversy in terms of, yay, that's contrary to church history or doctrine or something. I
Right.
don't I don't think there's any of those kind of elements to that. So I'm asking, why would that why would this whole idea of two sets of plates necessarily be uh, rejected or not be embraced by scholars across the board? It seems to make a lot of sense, and it doesn't seem to violate any principles.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because there's a well-known church historian named Richard Bushman, and he has his latest book. I don't know if you can see it here. If I do it
No,
right, there it is.
there we go.
It's called Joseph Smith's Gold Plates.
There we go. Barely.
Yeah, it's a little hard. There it is. All right, I'm going to turn off the virtual because um, I just had it on because in the background I have some of my artwork and stuff, which I thought was probably not that helpful. How would I do? I don't know how to turn off my virtual background now.
Oh, well, don't worry about it. I can see it if you
Okay.
hold it at the same plane as your face. I think it'll
Yeah,
show.
if I hold it right there, you can see it's Joseph Smith's gold plates. So he talks about this. He quotes this book about the gold plates,
Yeah.
and he pointed out that there is this idea of there being two different sets of plates makes more sense,
Hmm.
and I think it's becoming more widely accepted. I think the only resistance to it really are from the people who say the Hill Cumorah is not in New York
Okay.
because they think there's Hill Cumorahs in Mexico or Baja or Panama or somewhere else, and so they reject everything having to do with the Hill Cumorah being in New York, being part of the Book of Mormon, Hill Cumorah. And so for them, it's problematic. But anyone who doesn't care about the geography and just reads the church history realizes this makes more sense. It explains the scriptures. It explains that Joseph Smith actually did translate the engravings on the plates like the Lord told him to,
Yeah.
and that he needed to have a specific set of plates to translate those specific plates.
It
That,
totally makes sense. Totally makes sense to me. Well, listen, when we get together again, folks, we'll be going through another one of these titles. For now, we'll leave it here. And if you have any final comments, Jonathan, we'll wrap up with that.
yeah, well, one last thing is we can put some links maybe in the description that people can look online for some of these graphics and some
Yep.
more information. But the book goes through all the information, the historical sources with all the references to Joe Smith papers and other sources. So for me, it's just exciting. It makes church history more rational, more reasonable. And especially when we're talking about the Doctrine and Covenants, we can read D&C 9 and 10 and understand exactly what the Lord was saying.
Yeah. And for me, I love it because it 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 opens up a new thing in church history. And
Yeah.
church history doesn't change. There's a
That's
lot of
right.
new things. There's a lot of rehashed old things where they're
Yeah.
inventing new things all the time. But this is really something that is a significant breakthrough in my mind
Yeah.
that is faith affirming in every
Yeah.
respect. It
Yeah.
supports the prophet Joseph Smith, his testimony, Oliver Cowdery, and the other early church
Yeah.
brethren. So I highly recommend this book, folks. And yeah, you can get them. You can get them on digitallegend.com, and we'll have the link in the web below, and you'll get an extra discount on this and the other titles that we review on this podcast. So, signing off. Thanks, and we'll see you the next time.